coming up.
And in your experience, how often does CBSA go through those containers?
The security clearance program is driven by Transport Canada.
Okay, but who does them? Like, where do you
Transport
get
Canada.
Transport Canada does it. So where does Transport Canada get the information to do background checks on not only your 275 employees, but the 25,000 who have access to your port?
They don't do for the 25,000 people.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
In an earlier question, you answered to Mr. Caputo, you said that not many trucks are inspected at the Port of Montreal by CVSA. On April 3rd, it was announced that there were over 600 stolen vehicles.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
I was struck by something that Mr. Bergeron said, and that is that all access points are monitored to the port. Is that correct?
Yep.
So theoretically, any stolen vehicle is going through one of these monitored access points.
Yep.
Do I have that right?
Yep.
Is there anything in place to figure out, like as a vehicle goes through, whether that vehicle is stolen?
The vehicle is inside. If there is a vehicle inside a container, it's inside the container. It cannot be seen, and the container is sealed, and we don't have the authority or the power to open the container to see what's inside. It belongs to the CBSA.
I'm sorry?
It belongs to CBSA.
Okay. And the containers are all going to be sealed typically before they arrive, is that right?
Yeah, they have to be sealed.
Okay. And in your experience, how often does CBSA go through those containers?
In my experience, I can't really say, but not much.
Not much?
No.
Okay. And the containers, are they, how big, how small are we typically dealing with here?
The containers?
Yes.
Either 20 foot or 40 foot.
Okay, so those are the
those are two standard. There's some for 53, but they're rare. And they can fit 2 cars in the 20 foot or 3 cars in the 4 cars in the 40 foot.
Right. Now, at the point of entry, is it possible to determine what the actual cargo is? I assume not, because,
no.
Yeah.
We don't have access to that information.
Yeah, okay. Now, Ms. Gill, you talked about the inner workings here and the necessity for training for peace officers. In your experience, as somebody who's done a great deal of law enforcement, is there one aspect of law...
Yes. Sorry for the interruption. It's my understanding Parle View is not working and the audio is not being recorded. Can we just double check? Thank you.
Maybe they just thought they weren't missing anything. I met with me.
For all of our family members.
So,
my mother.
Just one moment, the clerk's going to give us an explanation. So we are aware of the issue. Right now, the issue is with the English channel, but the channel for floor and French works, and we are technician working on it, and we are recording everything.
Can our members hear? The Zoom is still working? I'm worried about people online, right?
Mr. McKinnon?
I just want to make sure.
I can hear fine. Thank you.
We'll continue. Please continue.
Thank you. Ms. Gill, thank you for being here.
Your time there.
When it comes to, you talked about your third point, the inner workings, is there one specific aspect, both in your experience, law enforcement at all 3 levels, as well as your experience here, is there one specific aspect of training that should be targeted to our peace officers?
Thank you for the question. So what I can say on that is the general awareness and familiarity of how a port authority operates is a mystery to most people, including law enforcement. Going through the different levels of training that I received, there wasn't any specific training on a port authority, how it operates. It's a landlord port, how independent terminal operators are independent, and the port authority administration doesn't have a say on what happens on container terminals because they're independent. It's those types of context questions questions that I think need to be answered first, and then we can go into the inner workings. How is labor dispatched? How are the GPSs on our trucks? Where can they get that information from? How much of a notice does CBSA have on what's in a container? So there's many pieces of information for the supply chain on how it comes in to really avail to law enforcement for them to be able to have a better understanding, to be able to pick out those areas where they feel they can do more investigation.
Okay. Can I ask, just how long did it take for you to feel comfortable to get up before you got up to speed in your position? Just because you're talking about these layers of complexity, it sounds complex. I imagine it was at least months before you felt comfortable?
I'm still learning. I've been there 10 years.
Wow. Okay. So obviously people who don't know what they're dealing with, this could be tremendously challenging.
Yes.
One thing that I don't know if it was touched upon was the role of organized crime. In your experience, and this goes to anybody who wants to intervene from the committee, is this something that you just appreciate as present and understand as present, or is it something you actually see blatantly in front of you when it comes to auto theft and organized crime?
I'll go for an answer to that. We acknowledge there might be some criminal organization operating in the port. They're everywhere. All sorts of point of entry, be the airport, be the ports, be the land ports, being other organizations. They're present. They're part of the society. But what we've done in port over the years is manage the access and manage the identification of people working in the port, making it more difficult for them to operate openly in the ports. It doesn't mean they can't ne peuvent soudoyer quelqu'un, mais anything that goes in and out of the port is being captured, being electronically or being by the identification, being by the biometrics. So the ports is now more considered a conduit, not a destination for the criminality. So they do their stuff before the port and after the port. They don't do stuff in the port because the detection rates is too high for them.
That's very good to know. I assume I'm out of time here. 40 seconds. Oh, I have about 40 seconds. Does anybody else want to intervene on that question?
Thank you. I agree with Felix Pierre's questions. I mean, we understand organized crime does exist. It exists any place where it can be used to facilitate the crime that they want to happen. It is here to stay. We just need to collectively figure out how we can all help minimize it.
So I guess I'm confused. If a car is stolen and is taken to the Port of Montreal, at that point, when the car is in a container at the Port of Montreal, can the local police, let's say PO police, can they come on their own, of their own volition, onto Port of Montreal property and search containers, or no?
We're not the better person to answer that question. You have to ask the different police of jurisdiction, because there's jurisdictional aspect of it, which we can't control. We just, for us in the Port of Montreal, the only people allowed to open a container for inspection at either airport and export is CBSA.
So you had also mentioned that it's CBSA and RCMP that have 24-hour access?
Yeah, they have 24-hour access.
Is that granted by the Port of Montreal, or is that granted through...
It's granted by the Port of Montreal, and it cascades down to the terminals.
So couldn't technically the Port of Montreal also grant access to local police jurisdictions all across the country?
We could if they ask access, but they couldn't open the container by themselves. CBSA needs to be there, or the RCMP, because they are the only two that can open a container under the Custom Act.
So you're saying CBSA and RCMP are the only two that can open the local container?
Under the Custom Act, yeah.
Okay, and then do you have local police jurisdictions across Canada reaching out to your
Not yet.
port?
They haven't applied for it yet. It's open for them. We've told them, but we've seen it a couple of weeks ago when the Toronto, the OPP did a joint operation with the police in Montreal. They seized a lot of cars and they arrested a few people. They came in with the police of jurisdiction, which is the police of Montreal.
So in your experience so far, from what you've observed, is CBSA working in conjunction with these local police forces when they do reach out?
Under my comprehension, they do work with them.
I'll ask this question to the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, and perhaps this question was already answered by the Montreal Port Authority, but why do you think that more vehicles are leaving Canada through the Montreal port than through your port? Is it just because of the geographical nature of the theft and where it's being taken to, the vehicles, or is there another element to it?
I do believe, that question was answered. To the best of my knowledge, I don't know of any other factors that we should be considering for why the rates are different.
Thank you.
Gahir? Yes, Mr.
Chair, I want to answer Mr. Gahir's question. It was a great line. When you have municipal law enforcement,
Eating up everyone else's time.
sorry, I just want to clarify. You had a question about jurisdiction, and I don't think it was clearly asked.
conversation, but we're eating up everyone's time.
It may be something that you could talk about, Mr. Motz, when your turn comes up, if you don't mind.
Car is not the easiest item to hide, and that we have a natural choke point. I'm just wondering how we can take best advantage of that. At the Port of Montreal, when you have successfully located contraband cars, obviously stolen cars, and I know with the containers they are loaded off-site, they are sealed, and I assume it's a wire tag with a manifest. When you've worked your way back, like you've opened the container, you've found stolen cars, and you like, that's how I like to approach problems. You find a problem, work your way backwards. What have been some of the common themes in that investigation? Like, where did things go wrong? Who ultimately signed off on what was in the container? That's how I want to know, like, how do we best improve that process?
It's part of the where the process goes haywire is there's no accountability on who stuffed the container. There's no, it's the paperwork once it's say signed off and sent to CBSA that's the end of it. But no, there's nobody that signed off saying what's in the container for real.
Okay.
It's all what's been submitted on paper. It's fraud, but how do you detect fraud? Then it's something that needs to be maybe reviewed in the regulations for accountabilities on the stuffing of the container.
And in discovering that fraud in the paperwork, is the person saying that it is in fact a vehicle that's being shipped, but it's a legitimate vehicle, or have you sometimes found that no, it's been, the manifest says that there had been something completely different? Are there some certain patterns?
We've seen Frigidaire on sale cars.
Okay.
They say it's Frigidaire's, but refrigerators, but it was cars in it.
Okay.
Like I said, there's no accountability. Who shut the doors and put the seal on?
Ms. Gill, did you have anything to add to that, like patterns that the Vancouver Port Authority has seen?
No, actually, I don't. Thank you.
Okay. I want to delve down onto this, the use of technology, and I understand from Mr. Gahir's line of questioning that's within the purview of the CBSA. I know our ports are extremely busy places, and that our economy relies on your operations to be efficient. You know, we don't want containers to stay static. You require them to be moved at quite a rapid pace. So I'm just wondering, like how do you envision, if we're going to make these investments into this technology, how do you envision that it's best being used? I know containers arrive at ports by train and by truck. Do you envision a system where, like, as each truck is rolling in through your entrances, it's being scanned, or on trains? I'm just trying to help me understand the logistics of what this involves, and what your requirements are as a port to both satisfy the security requirements, but also to make sure that the goods are still moving through at an acceptable rate.
I would add to that the safety aspect of the operation of the equipment, because we're talking usually about the radiation, emitting the equipment to scan, to X-ray the containers, and that would involve maybe the safety of the trucker or the operator or the workers around it. So we need to better assess what's the implication of putting in that technology, and do we have the space to put enough of them, not to slow down too much the entrance or the exit, if we want to go the exit too. But it needs to be studied before we can commit to that type of solutions. It exists somewhere else in the world, but in those places they don't have the same commitment as human life as we do in Canada.
And as a representative of the Port of Montreal, like have you seen demonstrations of this technology in use? Like, how in the places that it is being used, what lessons have you learned from how it's being deployed?
Well, I haven't traveled to those countries that use that technology, I know they exist, but we haven't. That's why we're not close to the use of that solutions, but it needs to be studied. So to the impacts, because just to give you an analogy with the equipment that CBSA already use to scan the import containers, it takes between 4 and 5 minutes each container to scan. So if we have 2,000 trucks a day entering the port times 4 minutes, it doesn't work.
A couple things are certainly troubling. One is the fact that the port authorities don't have, access to review the manifest. CBSA does to some degree. Obviously, there's a big gap between, as you said, Mr. Bergeron, the gap between a manifest is completed, but no one confirms that what's actually in the container is what's on the manifest. So there's an area we can fix. Any recommendations you have for that? I don't have time to do it all today, but if you guys from Port Authorities could supply that information on your recommendations on how we can fix that gap, that would be great. The other concern that I had is, I started law enforcement in 1980, before most of you in this room were born. And I can tell you that back then, early on, traditional organized crime in Montreal, outlaw motorcycle gangs in Vancouver, they ran the ports, and they still run the ports. And that is a fact. Now, but when I say that, it's not in the port proper, necessarily. It's that gap between a car stolen in the GTA. People think they drive it into the port, they drive it onto a container on port property. We know that doesn't work. That's not how it happens. So we have a gap there as well. We know that crime is getting worse in this country, and after the 9 years of this government, what do we need to do to ensure that the containers that are being filled elsewhere and coming onto port property are what's in them is in them, and we know what's in them. How do we do that differently, given organized crime is absolutely involved in that process?
Off the bat, it's kind of tough to answer the question precisely, but like I said earlier, is to devise either the regs or the acts to add some form of accountabilities.
Okay.
Be it the driver of the truck, be it the freight forwarder, be it whoever it's going to be, somebody is going to be signing on what is in the container. If it's false, somebody is going to go to jail for that.
Thank you for that. I noticed, Ms. Gill, you had made a comment about the Marine Transportation Security Act. Is it possible if that act, if the government takes the initiative to update that act, is it possible that we could change a process that, before a container is sealed and enters port property, that it is inspected? Like just, you open up the back door, someone at the port entrance says, yeah, we have refrigerators, we have cars. This is not what the manifest says. Like, would that be something that could stop the movement of contraband in and out of this country?
I wouldn't say it could be done in that fashion. The MTSRs are for port authorities to put in security measures to protect Canada's critical infrastructure. Almost exclusively, but that is the primary responsibility. The MTSRs do not have any mention of putting in measures for detecting or preventing criminality.
Okay.
So my suggestion would be that potentially, when we're talking about roles and accountabilities, is to add more of a role in there for persons either at the marine terminals or at the port authorities, where we could put in additional measures to assist law enforcement more than we're able to today.
Now, I know you probably in Vancouver have more, but you indicated in Montreal you have 275 employees for the port and about 25,000 peripheral people, companies that come in and do operations in there. What security measures do you have in place from a security clearance perspective? Do you guys do them? Do you get the law enforcement to do all your security clearances for everybody, or what?
The security clearance program is driven by Transport Canada.
Okay, but who does them? Like, where do
Transport Canada.
Transport Canada does it. So where does Transport Canada get the information to do background checks on not only your 275 employees, but the 25,000 who have access to your port?
They don't do for the 25,000 people.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, that might be part of the problem. They do it for specific position or specific access to certain places, but not for the general worker. Basically, it's resumed to people having authorities over other people, or people having authorities on the management of the inventory, like the checkers. The infamous checker we always talk about in the Port of Montreal that were for a long time affiliated with the West End gang. But that's old history. But basically, the longshoremen of the 1,200 longshoremen working in the port, maybe 200 of them have got security clearance because their jobs are not captured under the Transport Canada security clearance program.
So for Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, we have over 32,000 port passes, and only 7,000 of those are required to have security clearances. So as per the Transport Canada regulations, it's a requirement for everybody entering a cruise facility to all have security clearances. However, at container terminals, the way that the regulations are written are certain roles, and in certain areas of the container terminal, that is how the container terminal determines who needs a clearance. So it is through the guidance and the categories of people described by Transport Canada in the regulations. So we are kind of following the regulations on who can even apply.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Bergeron, I want to start with you. In an earlier question, you answered to Mr. Caputo. You said that not many trucks are inspected at the Port of Montreal by CVSA. On April 3rd, it was announced that there were over 600 stolen vehicles in an operation that were recovered in an operation with CBSA at the Port of Montreal. A quick Google search shows that a 20-foot shipping container usually fits one, maybe two cars. A 40-foot container could maybe hold four. So if I take the largest containers, that would mean about 150 containers at least were opened in that one operation. So I'm just wondering are you involved in any of that? Are you aware of any of that? Or was your statement earlier maybe that you wouldn't be aware of all the operational things that are happening?
Just to clarify, when I answered the question earlier, it was on a random basis, or a targeted basis at the entrance of the port. I'm not aware of any verification by customs or CBSA. They do, however, inspect containers when they've been declared, spotted, or whatever the system they use to guide them to inspect a container. They do open containers on a regular basis in the port. But be it for cars or drugs, we don't know. Right. They put aside a certain number of containers each day and every day, and they do the inspection on them.
Right. So that's important clarification, because I think to leave out there to Canadians to say not many are being inspected is...
They are inspected once they're targeted.
You talked about some of the concerns around the technology for just scanning every single container. We've heard about concerns in terms of timing and whatnot and how to find, and that's why we announced funding for additional study and research for other technology. But we hadn't heard before the kind of concerns from an employee standpoint from the radiation of the scanning technology. And you said that countries who do currently use this don't have human rights standards. What are some of those countries that use it? Because there are certain even mayors and politicians saying this is the only thing needed. And I think this is an important component.
Well, we've seen that technology being used, especially in the Middle East and those parts of the world. Other countries do use that technology. We do use it in Montreal, but the CBSA use it. But the human aspect has to be removed from the area where the scanning is being done. That increases the time where everything is stopped. That's why we need to better understand the technology and what's the impact on the fluidity and of the movements.
So you're not saying there isn't a place for scanning, but this idea of just setting up more scanners and scanning everything through is probably not necessarily feasible. Exactly. And therefore these other technologies would be important to then do the same work, but without the human kind of negative impacts and slowing down.
If they do exist, then we're open for it. It's just like Anita says, the better aspect would be the AI.
Okay.
That would be one of the things that could increase the success rates of detections.
In a previous life, I've worked on a walnut farm. I've seen these big sea containers loaded with raw walnuts, and they are closed and then they're shipped off. And yes, they are tagged. There's a manifest to say, yes, this container is full of walnuts. But I'm just wondering, like that container, once it's been sealed, is then in the hands of a number of different actors to get it from where it was loaded to the port and then onto a ship. Do you think there's value in what kind of liability does a transport company like say CN Rail or a trucking company, what liability do those companies or their drivers have or the railway operators have to like sometimes ensure what they're carrying is what's actually on the manifest?
As far as I know, they don't have liability because the container is sealed.
But do you see, would it be preferable from your point of view to maybe have a little bit more responsibility for those different actors?
Off the bat, I couldn't answer that question, but I would go back to my earlier statement saying we need to make accountable the person that put on the seal that's on the container. If the seal is not broken all the way up to the port, there's nothing happened what's inside of it. Mm-hmm. The importance is when the seal is put on, who signed for it? Mm-hmm. Who's responsible to vouch what's inside the container? Is it walnuts or cars?
Yeah.
That's the weakest point in the link right now.
Okay.
There's no responsibility for that.
Just continue on that line of questioning. You have you're saying there's no accountability for the person for who's putting the seal on that container that says what is or is not in it. How do we fix that?
Well, I'm not a better person to answer that question. It has to be referred, unfortunately, to CBSA or the other agencies that govern those acts. Because it's not something that's the manifest and all the information for export is governed by CBSA.
Are these seals individually identifiable? I'll ask Ms. Gill, please.
I will let Felix Pierre answer that question. I'm not as familiar with the seal process as he is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fair enough.
I'll be a pleasure to answer the question. Yes, they are identifiable. They have either a numerical number or alphanumerical numbers. But they are different type of seals. They are wire seals, chain seals, high security seals, plastic seals, paper seals, and they all have unique numbers. That might be a fault in the system that needs to be probably reassessed on a standardized seal or something, because it's the only thing that we have on the manifest or the legal paper is the number. It doesn't say what type of seal it is.
So are the people who are the people who are able to put seals on a container? And apparently once the seal's on there, it has a certain legal significance. Do they have to be bonded entities?
That's something that CBSE must answer for us. I'm not familiar with that aspect, but that's the person like I said earlier, the accountability part is not very strong in the acts or the regulation right now. So that's something that needs to be better answered by the CBSE.
I guess what I'm drawing into is perhaps as a way of examining the seals themselves to determine their origin, to see whether these origins are problematic in terms of stolen vehicles that have already been detected, and can the ports? I don't know if the ports can do that. Maybe it's law enforcement has to drill into this, but I guess can you make any suggestions to make the person who puts on the seal more responsible?
Like I said earlier, it's the act regulation has to be revised. Right now, there is no accountability for that. The acts or the regulation requires the seals to be put on and signify on the paperwork, but that's the end of it.